So on top of the soy estrogen, oftentimes we're getting mycoestrogen, mold estrogens, and the levels are outrageous. In America, we don't regulate even the mold estrogen. We don't regulate it at all. There's no limit to mold estrogen.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 130, and my guest is Dr. Anthony J. Anthony has a Ph.D. in biochemistry, and he researches stem cells and epigenetics at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. You heard him on episode 115, the one about chemicals that wreak havoc with your health. Today, he does a deep dive on the topic of soy. Some say it's heart healthy. Many consider it a perfect protein food. Anthony sheds new light on the topic. He brings the science, and he explains how financial interests play a part in the misinformation that's out there. Today, you'll learn why soy is an estrogenic food and what that means, the cumulative effects of soy on our health, and how traditional peoples consume soy and remained healthy without the complications that we often see today. Before we dive into the subject, we want to thank our sponsors. Today's Wise Traditions podcast is brought to you in part by Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant, the probiotic everyone's talking about. Go to thriveprobiotic.com. And Kraut Pounder. Do you make your own ferments? You're going to want this beautiful tool made by Kraut Pounder. It does just what its name suggests. It is a handmade piece of maple that is unique and perfectly crafted for preparing your ferments. So get yourself a Kraut Pounder from krautpounder.com. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Anthony.
Thanks for having me.
The last time you were on, we were talking about how we wanted to tackle the subject of soy. I am particularly interested in this because I'm a fitness professional and I often get magazines about wellness, and they'll include food recommendations, and soy is usually up there on the list. They believe it's heart healthy and a good substitute for meat. What's your take on it?
Interestingly, when I wrote my book, I wrote a chapter on scientific bias and spin from corporate influence. And I didn't think the editors were going to accept that chapter because it's not really about artificial estrogen chemicals. But most of the editors came back and said that was their favorite chapter because, I do research, I work in labs, I see some of these issues, and most people aren't aware. For example, if I send in a research publication, I select my own peer reviewers. I select 5 people to peer review my paper within the field, but I personally tell the journal who to review my paper. So you can oftentimes get really biased publications. And another good example is the previous editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. Her name is Marcia Angel. I think Angel with 2 L's. She resigned. She stepped down because there was so much corporate influence. She even wrote a book about it. There was so much corporate influence that it was just making her uncomfortable. And she talks about it in this book that I've read. And she's also from Boston University Medical School, where I got my Ph.D. Just the fact that if you have a lot of corporate influence, which you of course do with soy, there's a lot of money involved, you can put a lot of spin on these research publications. And then you quote unquote find discrepancies and get all kinds of mixed research. But when you really dive in and you get past that spin, it's not at all healthy. It's not heart healthy. It's not any of these things. My expertise, of course, is estrogen. And just the estrogen chemicals alone in soy, they're called phytoestrogen, plant estrogens. And I'll give you the numbers because it's important people realize. There was a study done in Canada, over 100 food items, just looking at the estrogen content, the phytoestrogen content in foods, common plants and things. Chickpeas had 9 micrograms of phytoestrogen. Black beans had like 13. Almost every single item that they studied was under 1,000. Soy was over 100,000 of phytoestrogen. Yeah.
Where is that coming from?
The plant makes it. So plants make hormones just like anything else that are involved in growth and signaling and whatever. And some of these hormones, when we eat them, they act like estrogen in our body. It's not normal, but soy just makes this specific one called genistein and some other isoflavones that are estrogenic. They act like estrogen in our bodies.
What's crossing my mind right now is, don't we make some formulas for infants based primarily on soy?
Yeah, and they're really a problem. There's been research since the 1980s, I think it was even since the 1960s, showing the health problems from those infant formulas based on soy. You can't get rid of the estrogens from the soy, almost no matter what you do. You could say, well, we can just make pure oils from soy oil. But I even tell people to avoid that because those are those oxidized, processed fats that are causing so many health problems. People like Kate Shanahan are out talking about. Even when they try and purify out the estrogens, it's still not a healthy product.
Right.
What's really ironic about soy is for some reason the vegans have picked it up as kind of their poster child of health. And a lot of the scientists are on board with that. And I can tell you that story. It's a little bit complicated, but I can try and simplify it if you want.
Yeah, tell us.
So in your body, you have estrogen receptors that pick up estrogen, that bind to estrogen. You don't just have estrogen receptor. You have estrogen receptor alpha and beta. You have two different types. And this is pretty normal with receptors and things because if you have a mutation in one or something, you've got a backup. It's called redundancy. It's common in biology. It's not unusual. But what the vegans have essentially argued, and they don't need to argue this, there's no reason soy should be healthy. But for some reason, again, because all these fake hamburgers and fake food items are made with soy, they feel like obligated to rationalize this whole thing. But what they do is they tell you that, at least the scientists, they'll tell you that soy estrogen binds estrogen receptor beta, but it doesn't bind estrogen receptor alpha. And that makes it beneficial. That makes it healthy because beta is involved in a lot of health benefits, whereas if it binds alpha, it's involved in a lot of negative things. The problem with that, number one, is the research paper that supposedly shows that.
Yeah.
That's one figure. They showed that with some cell type that it binds beta receptors and not alpha. But in the next figure in that same paper, they found the exact opposite effect with a different type of cell. They found that it mostly binds alpha and not beta.
Oh.
And so the conclusion from that paper was, we don't know what's going on. Obviously, there's discrepancy within these different cell types, and these experiments aren't very accurate. But that's the big paper that they kind of go to and say, look, soy estrogen binds the beta receptor, and that makes it healthy. The other problem just with that logic, even if that was true, which it's not, even let's say it was true, the irony there is the male testes have a lot of estrogen receptor beta. And so that would mean if soy only binds the beta, then that means there's a lot of estrogen binding your testes and causing male feminization, which of course you see. That's a reality, but I don't think that's the only thing you see with soy. I mean, you see all the usual other health problems like lowering testosterone. There's thyroid issues, immune system issues. Even if the alpha beta argument was legitimate that they're using, these vegans, to try and explain how soy is somehow healthy, the soy estrogen is healthy, even that argument is a bad one because they're telling us that it's harmful to males.
Oh, but they don't see the weakness in their own argument because they're so hyped up about it.
Yeah, and I don't think they realize that the testes have a lot of estrogen receptor beta. I mean, they're not told that part of the story. They're kind of told estrogen receptor beta is a drug target, and that's a beneficial thing, and that's what soy binds. But again, soy doesn't. Soy binds both estrogen alpha and beta, depending on the study you're looking at. And you see the health impacts from that on all the different levels. Again, when you have that high of a level, with hormones, what happens is you see it with people that are injecting testosterone and things. Your body lowers the receptors. It's called negative feedback. So you have to keep injecting more and more testosterone, for example. If you're a bodybuilder or something and you want to get huge, you're injecting a little bit. Your body kind of blunts the response. And so you have to inject more. And then it blunts the response again. And you have to inject more. And that's what's happened to us, I think, in America, is that we've been exposed to so much of this that our bodies blunt the response to the estrogen. And that doesn't mean it's good. That just means that we're getting exposed to way too much. So that there is some discrepancy within the studies. There are studies that show no difference. There's studies that show health problems. There's studies that show health benefits, supposedly. One good example is ovarian cancer is supposedly decreased with soy. It might be breast cancer. It might be both. I have this, of course, in my book. But then there's another study that shows the exact opposite, how those types of cancers are increased. So it's like, it depends on the study you're picking out, right? That's where this bias comes in. The difficulty is when you have scientific bias that's corporate funded, it's hard to tell who you can trust with these studies. I mean, they're picking their peer reviewers,
Wow.
they're cherry picking the data.
Totally.
So it's a frustrating thing. Yeah, it's frustrating for me as a scientist to see just the mess we're in, because all I want is people to be healthy and know what's healthy and what's not.
And that's exactly what I love about the foundation. Actually, they are not beholden to any company or corporation that's trying to lobby for more of this or that. They are just really trying to look out for everybody's health. And that's why, I don't know if you know about this, Anthony, but they set out a prison lawsuit because prisoners were being fed all this soy and were having resulting health complications. And I think it's still in the appeal stages right now, but I'm really proud of them because who's going to stand up for prisoners, you know? But they are because they don't want them to have all those health repercussions. And the other thing they've been doing is petitioning the American Heart Association, I believe, to remove their heart healthy label claim on soy products. And I believe we are this close, if we haven't won already, this step in the right direction from the American Heart Association. It's very exciting.
Most people don't even factor in mold. And in America, we have a real mold issue with these grains that are mass produced and mass stored. Some mold actually secretes estrogen. It's called mycoestrogen. Technically, the mycoestrogen is called zearalenone, Z-E-A, zearalenone. You know, when you have mold, one of the problems with mold is when you're breathing in mold or you're eating it on these grains, it's got this estrogen, this mold estrogen. So on top of the soy estrogen, oftentimes we're getting mycoestrogen, mold estrogens, and the levels are outrageous. In America, we don't regulate even the mold estrogen. We don't regulate it at all. There's no limit to mold estrogen. And in Europe, they have really strict limits. In England, they've got a limit. In Europe, they've even got a lower limit that's allowable. And when the grains don't pass the limits, they ship them over here to America and use them in human foods. They even have cattle limits in Europe for mold estrogen. And that compounds the problem because all of these estrogens are cumulative. They're all acting on the same receptor. So when you're trying to study soy estrogen specifically, you have to realize that we're being exposed to a number of other estrogens, and that's confounding the research. That's confusing everything. That's another reason all of these studies with fats, like when they do a study on bacon or something and say, oh, bacon is unhealthy. Think about what's in the bacon. What are these pigs eating, right? They're eating all of these estrogen chemicals. They're storing it in their fats. So are you really studying the effect of the fat, or are you studying all these chemicals that are in the fat? And I'm telling you, they're studying these chemicals that are stored in the fat because they're acting in our bodies at nanogram levels. That's 10 to the minus 9th grams. It's hard to even measure that unless you have incredibly good instruments in your research lab.
Yeah, this very thought crossed my mind when the World Health Organization came out with a statement saying that red meat could be carcinogenic. And I thought, well, what red meat are they studying? Because if they're studying meat that comes from animals that were pasture raised, hormone and antibiotic free, that's quite different from the meat from animals from the confined animal feeding operations.
There's no question when they're doing these research studies, they're always using really questionable stuff, you know, the questionable fats. They're putting soy in this stuff. That's a super frustration for me as a scientist because I'm trying to cut through all this stuff. And there's so many studies. You've got to really dig into the study to try and find out, are they using good quality products? 99% of the time, no. It definitely confuses everybody. It's confusing people that are really well-intentioned and trying to figure out, well, can I eat meat? Can I eat fat? And I'm telling you, you can. I've studied this. I'm even writing a book on it, Hilda. I'm writing a book called Blubber Brain. You know, it needs to be told. The story needs to be told. I was really impressed with Sally's book, Nourishing Fats. Those kind of stories are just really important for people to know. And like, you can't just trust the headlines that are coming out.
Coming up, Anthony explains how traditional people prepared and ate soy and what we can learn from their traditional methods. We want to pause now and recognize our sponsors, Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant. Most probiotic pills just pass through our bodies without achieving the desired effect. Just Thrive is the first 100% spore-forming probiotic that arrives alive in the intestines naturally. It supports optimal gut health, digestive health, immune health, and delivers antioxidants. It's great for adults, kids, the whole family. It's the probiotic everyone's talking about. Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant. Visit their website at thriveprobiotic.com. And have you tried making your own ferments? You must get yourself a kraut pounder. Kraut pounder makes beautiful pieces for the process. Each kraut pounder is turned from a solid piece of maple, natural hardwood. They each have their own unique markings and are finished with natural walnut oil. The design for the pounder was inspired by a kraut pounder that belonged to a grandmother of a member in the Eugene, Oregon Weston A. Price chapter. So go to krautpounder.com and get fermenting today. The last time I interviewed you, you brought this up as well, that in Europe, the standards are more strict about what's in our food, what estrogenics we're exposed to. Why is there this big difference? Why are they so attentive in Europe to the threats to our health compared to how we are here in the U.S.?
Because of the corporate influence. So the politicians here in America are more influenced by the money behind the scenes. And so they're protecting a lot of the big corporations that are involved in producing a lot of these chemicals or a lot of these food products, quote unquote food, because I don't even know if some of this stuff can be called food. But yeah, I think it's corporate influence. I know a scientist, his name is Michael Skinner out in Washington. He studies epigenetics and how these health problems, not only do they affect us that are being exposed to them from these estrogen chemicals, they expose multiple generations. Out to 4 generations is what he finds. In other words, infertility goes down multiple generations out. You see weight gains go up multiple generations out. And not just 2 or 3 generations, but 4 generations, which is really important scientifically. I've sat down, had lunch with this guy and everything at the Mayo Clinic here. Skinner, he gave a talk in Europe about one of these chemicals. It was a fungicide chemical. And literally a week later, they made it illegal because it was so obvious that this chemical was causing multi-generational health impacts. And they were insidious because they don't cause the problem right away. You don't see the health problem immediately, but you only see it in the future generations. It kind of expands in future generations. And they made it illegal the next week. So that's the corporate influence, I think.
I'm envious. And I know we have listeners in Europe, so kudos to you all. I'm happy that you're living in a healthier situation than we are right now here in the U.S. Some traditional peoples ate soy, and yet I don't think they had all these health repercussions. Do you happen to know how did their bodies manage to handle all that estrogen?
Well, number one, they usually ferment the soy. They make something like natto or like the soy sauces that are naturally fermented. Part of that food study I mentioned at the very beginning, they looked at soy sauce that was actually fermented, not some industrial soy sauce where they pretended to ferment it and shortcut the process, but it was about 100 nanograms per microgram, or whatever the units were.
Okay.
It was about 100. Like I said before, soybeans themselves are over 100,000. So those levels, when you're fermenting them, are not problematic. And then the second thing is, historically, they weren't eating that much soy. You know, if you go out in a soy field and you start eating soybeans, your body tells you to stop pretty quickly. You eat a few beans and you go, But we've put so much processing on them and tricked our brains into thinking that we're eating something really nutritious, that we eat way more than we normally would historically. And then thirdly, our gut bacteria is so compromised today. And I think our ancestors had these incredibly healthy guts. And that can cause huge discrepancies when you're doing soy research because the gut bacteria can break down those estrogens from the soy and they can actually lead to totally normal or even healthy byproducts. The problem is if you've got an iffy gut bacteria or gut biome, those estrogens just go right into your body. And that causes a lot of variability. And so you can say, well, do you have a healthy gut? I don't know. That's pretty hard to quantify scientifically. So it's more and more risky these days to eat a lot of soy.
Well, I feel like women are more likely to be eating soy. It seems like to me the guys I hang around anyway just want the meat, and they don't want the artificial stuff, but the women will go for the soy. Do you think that's true?
Probably, yeah. And the sad thing is because these things trick your body into causing fat storage, and most of the women are more concerned about weight gains than the men, just on an intellectual level. It's a real uphill battle. It's literally driving their bodies to, number one, become infertile, and then number two, to actually store fat. So then they have to eat even less than normal, and then their metabolism goes down. It's kind of a vicious cycle.
Can you talk to us more about the consequences of indulging in soy that's not fermented?
I think in my book I have 5 health problems that are from soy. As you do the research, you find all the same types of health problems that you find with other artificial estrogen chemicals, like increased blood clotting, increased depression, lower testosterone, breast cancer, immune system issues, and weight gains.
So the same things that you see across the board with too much exposure to estrogenics.
That's correct. I mean, you have to dig pretty deep on some of those to find them and to see whether the studies have even been done on some of that stuff. Again, like things like depression, it's pretty hard to do a research study. That's a multi-year study. You can't really do it in animals. Sometimes they try, but some of these things are difficult to study, but you dig enough in the research and you can find it. Then there's also thyroid issues, like I mentioned before, but I don't think those have to do with the estrogen itself. It's probably some other chemical in the soy that's disrupting the thyroid because you don't see that health issue with other estrogen chemicals.
Yeah, I feel like I know a lot of women that struggle with thyroid concerns.
That's not just one health problem. If you have a thyroid problem, you're going to see a lot of health issues in different ways throughout your body, especially energy.
Is there something else you want to mention pertaining to soy that we haven't gotten to yet?
I think the trifecta of issues with soy is, number one, it's estrogenic. Number two, there's a lot of mold in it, and that's also estrogenic, mycoestrogen. And then number three, they're spraying so much on it with the atrazines and the glyphosates, which atrazine, again, it's totally estrogenic. Like I said, a trifecta of health problems. I didn't even talk about GMOs, especially with the BT toxin and some of these glyphosate resistant things, so that where they spray more and more and more glyphosate. It's not something I would ever promote, and it's unhealthy.
So what would you recommend that people do in terms of how would they avoid soy? It's in products too. It's not like you're just getting it in tofu, right? It's in other products as well.
It's especially frustrating with things like salad dressings. I don't enjoy eating salads, so I put dressings on them, but man, it's hard to find a good dressing that doesn't have soy. It's not in plastic.
Yeah.
And maybe people need to make their own salad dressings. It's a big thing. Look on the food labels.
And maybe just start eating more food that doesn't even have labels.
Yeah, exactly. Whole foods.
To really avoid it. Soy is a plant that has this huge level of estrogens that can really cause issues with our health. Are there other plants that have these same things that I should be avoiding?
The only one that raised red flags besides soy was flax, ironically enough. And flax has a totally different type of estrogen. It's called lignan, like Lignan. Your gut bacteria seem to handle lignans a lot better than isoflavone estrogens from soy. But I still avoid flax. I do recommend people avoid eating a ton of flax, which is ironic, again, because that's also seen as a health food. And there are good fats in flax. There's benefits there, but risky if you don't know the status of your gut bacteria. And the other two are lavender essential oil. Mm-hmm. There's been a couple of scientific research papers, and one of them was in the New England Journal of Medicine that showed that children, like little boys especially, were getting gynecomastia. They were getting breast tissue. And then when they stopped using the lavender essential oil, the breast tissue went away. And then they did studies on actual cells and showed that the lavender essential oil was acting like estrogen in the cells, which is a lot more important for me as a scientist to see. The only other one was cannabis, marijuana. Smoking marijuana is estrogenic.
Really?
And that's why you see a lot of the fertility problems when younger people are smoking cannabis, especially teenagers. They really have to be careful. I don't think you get the problems with eating it because, again, it goes back to gut bacteria. But the way you should think about this, our gut bacteria, we've seen these plant estrogens before. They've seen them. They're natural chemicals. They can break them down if they're healthy. They haven't seen BPA. They haven't seen birth control. They haven't seen red 40, like artificial red food dyes. So at least with the plant estrogens, if you've got a really healthy gut bacteria, you don't usually get a lot of the health issues. But it's still good to have them on your radar so you know what the other ones are.
And the truth is, most of us have compromised guts. So we need to really be wary of these.
Especially with glyphosate in America.
Yeah. So I want to ask you the question now that I often ask at the end of my program. If the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, Anthony, what would you recommend that they do?
I really see a lot of benefits from lifting heavy weights, honestly, lifting heavy things. Not just doing lots of cardio, but actual heavy lifting. So I'd recommend that to people. I've seen so many people just transformed, even at older ages, like age 60, 70. And I'm not saying just jump right in and start lifting really heavy things, but you work up real slow and you add 5 pounds per week, and pretty soon you're deadlifting 200 pounds or something, and your body just really responds in a healthy way from that.
Wow, that's an unexpected answer, but I like it. Anthony, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I think there's lots of food for thought, and we look forward to talking to you again sometime. Take care.
Thanks, Hilda.
My guest today was Dr. Anthony J. To connect with Anthony, go to ajconsultingcompany.com. For the show notes and highlights from this episode, with links to resources we mentioned, just go to the westinaprice.org website and find the show notes for episode 130. Hey, and if you are enjoying these shows, go ahead and subscribe through Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a thing. You can rate and review us there as well. And feel free to share episodes on social media. You can follow us on Twitter at Weston A. Price and on Instagram at Weston A. Price. And look for us on Facebook, Weston A. Price Foundation. Next week, you guys, we're talking with author and nutritional therapy practitioner Jennifer Scribner about picky eating. Do you have any picky eaters in your life? Why do they crave carbs so much? And how can we help them overhaul their diet and improve their health? Catch next week's episode for practical tips on doing just that. A quick thank you now as I wrap up to Rob Ford, Charlie Burney, and all my friends at Podcast Village. And thanks to the team of interns for the show, Cynthia Castro-Cohen Enriquez, Joy de los Santos, Amy Marvin, Deirdre Beard, Melanie Ahern, Mary Hine, and Olga de Villiers. Finally, let's stay connected. Tell me what you thought of today's show, or suggest topics for future episodes. I'm on Twitter at Holistic Hilda, on Instagram at Holistic_Hilda, or just visit my website, holistichilda.com, so I can support you on your wellness or podcasting journey. Thanks, everybody.
Did you know that there are Weston A. Price Foundation chapters all over the U.S. and around the world? Chapter leaders help you find good food in your area, and some have meetings you can attend. Go to our website, westonaprice.org, and click on Find a Local Chapter to see if there is one near you. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.